for more on this, let's bring in Brandeis University history professor Leah Wright-Rigueur. Professor, thanks again for being here. How unprecedented is what we're seeing play out right now with this election?
So it's certainly unprecedented in recent history, and I mean that in the kindest way possible. We've had contested elections before. We've had bitter elections before. The closest to something that we've seen with this in the recent moment is something like Bush v. Gore in 2000. But even in that moment, the outcome of that election, when it became clear that the outcome of this election, there was no viable path, that the court had ruled against, the Florida incident, we know that Gore conceded, and he did so relatively quickly. So we did have this moment concession. What we're seeing right now is something completely different. We're seeing Donald Trump say, I refuse to acknowledge that Joe Biden is the president-elect, and I'm going to fight it even though I don't have evidence and even though I keep losing in court. So that kind of rigidity is very different and very unprecedented for this time.
And Leah, if I may ask you, the 2020 election has been called by the government's top election security official the most secure in U.S. history, and President Trump's trying to overturn, obviously, his loss. State of Michigan is now a key target. Wayne County Republicans initially refusing to certify the vote, citing unbalanced returns, but they only wanted part of Wayne County not certified. And that was Detroit, obviously a predominantly minority city, even though some of the white suburbs had higher rates of those unbalanced returns. Those are the facts. So what do you call that?
That's voter suppression, or at least it's attempted voter suppression. And what's really interesting about this is that we've had other instances of voter suppression. I know a lot of people point to stuff like tossing people's names off the voter rolls, things like, driver's license and IDs, discrepancies, shutting down polling places. But this is an explicit and very naked form of voter suppression, the likes that we haven't really seen since, the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. I mean, we're talking Jim Crow era level voter suppression, because the idea here is simply to just get rid of votes that you don't like because they come from Detroit and because they come from a predominantly black area that trends Democratic.
So how do you think this all affects our democratic process in general, and how do we move forward from this?
Well, this is the kind of thing that if Trump were able to succeed and were able to find some viable pathway to retaining the presidency while tossing out millions of votes, that right there, that's the end of democracy in the United States. Right? We thrive on this idea of free and fair elections and the representation of people and people having a vote. Every vote matters, right? Including black votes, including Latino votes and Latino votes, including Asian American and Indigenous votes. All those votes matter. And what we're seeing right now is an attempt by the President of the United States to toss those kinds of votes out. So that's the end of democracy. So how do you move on? I think part of how you move on is that the norms and the guideposts and the kind of the barriers that are usually against this kind of what we might even call tyranny, that those things come into place and assure that the process is smooth and that it's fair. And we have seen a lot of that in the lead up to this, right? This is why we know that this election was the most secure election that we've had in recent U.S. history. So we see those kinds of things. But also I think what is important to maintain is that the president-elect of the country and the vice president-elect of this country keep a steady face and keep a steady hand and keep moving towards the finish line. And when that, when it's time for the electors to cast their ballots in December, that they do the right thing and honor the votes and the voices of the people.
And that ultimately will be the deciding factor. Professor Leah Wright-Rigueur, thank you as always.
Thank you.